Let's begin here, because many confuse scars with personality. A man who apologizes for being tired. A woman who explains every choice. A heart that grows uneasy when kindness is offered. These are not quirks. They are survival codes written long ago. They are invisible patterns carried from childhood into the quiet corners of adulthood, shaping how love is received and how easily it is pushed away. You see, the child of a narcissistic parent does not learn that love is a gift. They learn it is a transaction. Every gesture, every boundary, every breath must be justified. And so decades later, even in a stable life, they feel unsafe in their own skin. Their nervous system remains tuned for storms that no longer exist. They scan the horizon for betrayal, though no enemy stands in sight. Before I continue, let me know where you're listening from in the comments, and if reflections like this resonate, don't forget to like and subscribe. Now let's go deeper. The world tells us to just relax, to accept kindness, as though trust could be willed into being. But for the adult child of emotional neglect, tenderness feels like a trap. The body braces, the breath tightens, the mind whispers, "What will this cost me?" Here is the great misunderstanding that these reactions are signs of weakness. In truth, they are signs of intelligence. As Carl Jung once wrote, what we call a disease of the soul is often a defense against greater suffering. The body remembers, and what once preserved life now stands in the way of intimacy. Imagine carrying a compass calibrated in a hostile landscape. Every step points you toward defense, not connection. This is why a calm, reliable love can feel unnerving. It does not match the old terrain. It feels like silence where there should be thunder. And so the survivor drifts back toward the familiar battlefield, not because it is good, but because it is known. Here is the first truth of our journey. What seems like personality is often adaptation. The endless apologizing, the performance of many masks, the mistrust of gentle affection, none of these were chosen freely. They were crafted in childhood to avoid rejection, to keep peace in a house where peace was fragile. The child learned to survive, but the adult longs to live. In Jungian language, we could say the persona, the mask presented to the world, has grown too heavy. It hides the shadow, the neglected self that knows life can be different. Individuation. The path of becoming whole begins when one notices this tension. When you recognize that the storm you are bracing for has already passed. This is why the opening step matters. To see the scars for what they are not, flaws, not permanent chains, but echoes of an old battlefield. You are not broken for carrying them. You are not weak for reacting. You are human, and the story has only begun. Every wound begins with a small fracture. It is not always visible, yet. It is felt deep inside. For the child raised in a house ruled by self-absorbed love, this fracture forms early. Love is no longer a birthright, but a transaction. Affection becomes a coin, offered only when the child performs, pleases, or bends to the expectations of another. What should have been the safe soil of belonging turns into a field where every step requires calculation. In such a house, tenderness is never simple. A gentle touch is rarely free of conditions. It is given to control or withdrawn to punish. The child learns that joy can be followed by betrayal, that kindness may conceal a hidden price. In time, trust itself becomes dangerous. The very moments meant to anchor the heart are the ones that destabilize it most. This is the first fracture, the breaking of innocence that whispers to be loved. I must become what others demand. When boundaries arise in such a childhood, they are not respected. A simple no may be met with rage, guilt, or icy withdrawal. The message is clear. Your needs do not matter unless they serve the parent's image. And so the child begins to explain, to justify, to soften their voice, all in an effort to avoid punishment. What should be a healthy act of self-definition becomes a negotiation, and the seed of self-doubt is planted. This fracture is not only emotional, but physiological. The nervous system of a child in such a home becomes tuned for survival. The body learns to scan the room before entering. The ear sharpens to catch shifts in tone. The eyes read every glance for hidden meaning. These skills are remarkable in their precision, but they come at a cost. The body never learns rest. Safety never feels certain. Intimacy becomes a battlefield where one must remain on guard. Here, Jung's insight into the shadow becomes vital. The shadow is not only the dark impulses we repress, but also the innocent needs we were never allowed to show. A boy learns to bury his longing for unconditional love. A girl learns to hide her anger at being unseen. Both carry this hidden life inside them, and both grow into adults haunted by the same patterns. The fracture of childhood becomes the blueprint of their relationships. What follows is repetition. As adults, they are drawn to what is familiar, even when it is harmful. The heart reaches toward emotionally unavailable partners, mistaking distance for passion. Effort becomes proof of worth struggle, becomes the language of intimacy. And when someone offers simple, steady affection, it feels alien, even suspicious. The fracture has become a compass pointing again and again toward the terrain of conditional love. The tragedy is not that these men and women are weak. The tragedy is that their strength has been misdirected. They endure storms that should never have been theirs to bear. They learn resilience in chaos, but doubt their right to peace. Their ability to adapt becomes so refined that they lose sight of who they truly are. The persona, the mask created for survival, grows thicker with each passing year, while the authentic self remains hidden beneath. We must understand these fractures are not evidence of failure. They are the natural outcome of growing up in an environment where love was rationed like water in a desert. What appears as over-explaining, constant apologizing, or mistrust of tenderness is in truth an intelligent adaptation. It is the psyche's way of ensuring survival in a world that could not be trusted. Yet the fracture carries its own poison. Over time, the strategies that once protected the child now imprison the adult. The endless justifications erode boundaries. The hypervigilance breeds exhaustion. The mistrust of kindness pushes away the very love the heart longs for. What began as survival becomes a cycle of self-sabotage. And still many do not understand why. At this stage, the temptation is to blame oneself, to say I am too sensitive, too anxious, too needy. But this is the echo of the narcissistic wound speaking. It is the inner critic, a voice borrowed from long ago, repeating the lie that one's existence is a burden. The fracture is reinforced every time the adult apologizes for being tired, for asking for space, for simply existing. Jung wrote that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. The fracture is precisely this unconscious pattern. Left unnamed, it governs choices silently. It guides the heart back to the same kind of partner, the same kind of disappointment, the same fear of tenderness. What feels like fate is in truth the repetition of an old survival script. To recognize the fracture is to begin the work of individuation. It is to see that what once felt like personality, the masks, the caution, the hunger for approval, are not the essence of the self. They are the debris of an old battlefield. Individuation does not erase the fracture, but it illuminates it, showing that the wound is not the whole. Consider the symbol of the cracked vessel. In ancient traditions, a vessel with a fracture was seen not only as damaged, but also as uniquely capable of holding light. The crack allowed something new to shine through. So it is with the human soul. The fracture that once defined survival can, with awareness, become the opening through which healing enters. But at this moment in our story, the adult child of narcissistic love does not yet see this. They feel only the weight of their patterns. They carry shame for their reactions, confusion about their choices, exhaustion from their vigilance. The fracture is still hidden in shadow, shaping their life in silence. This is the truth of the first wound. It destabilizes not only the child, but also the adult they will become. It is the ground from which the patterns of explaining, apologizing, performing, and mistrusting arise. And until the fracture is seen, it repeats its influence endlessly. Yet even here, in this hidden pain, something remarkable is present. The very capacity to notice, to question, to feel the discomfort of these patterns. This is the beginning of awakening. The fracture may be painful, but it is also the place where awareness is born. For what cracks open can also let light in. When the fracture of childhood is carried into adulthood, the result is often a life lived behind masks. Outwardly, a person may appear capable, considerate, even admired by many. Inwardly, they feel a constant tension, as if every moment demands performance. This is not dishonesty. It is adaptation. The child who learned that authenticity was unsafe grows into an adult who fears being seen as they truly are. So, the persona is created. Jung used this word to describe the mask presented to the world, the social face designed to meet expectations and win approval. It is not inherently false. We all wear roles that help us navigate society. But for those who grew up under conditional love, the persona becomes more than a role. It becomes a shield worn day and night until the person beneath it begins to disappear. One can see this in subtle ways. A woman rehearses conversations she may never have afraid of saying the wrong thing. A man rewrites a simple message 20 times, fearing his tone will cause rejection. Even in solitude, the performance continues. The inner dialogue is shaped not by freedom, but by anticipation of judgment. In time, life itself begins to feel like an endless audition. The cost of this performance is profound. When every interaction requires calculation, spontaneity dies. When every emotion must be justified, true intimacy cannot breathe. And when every boundary must be explained, self-worth begins to erode. The persona becomes polished, professional, socially skilled. Yet behind its surface, the shadow waits that hidden part of the self that carries the unmet needs, the repressed anger, the silenced authenticity. The shadow is not only darkness, it holds all that was forbidden, ignored, or unloved. For the child of a narcissistic parent, this may include the simple desire to rest without guilt, to receive affection without suspicion, to exist without apology. These are not dangerous impulses. They are natural human needs. But when the environment punishes them, they retreat into shadow, and the persona rises to cover them. The conflict between shadow and persona creates a life of contradictions. Outwardly, one appears kind, flexible, accommodating. Inwardly, resentment builds. Outwardly, one is praised for empathy and attentiveness. Inwardly, exhaustion spreads because no space remains for personal truth. The mask earns approval, but the soul feels unseen. This tension is not sustainable. Jung observed that whatever is denied in the shadow eventually makes itself known through projection, through anxiety, through unexplained anger, or through an aching emptiness. A man who apologizes constantly may secretly rage at the burden of carrying everyone's comfort. A woman who anticipates every mood in the room may secretly resent never being cared for herself. These emotions are not signs of failure. They are signals from the shadow demanding to be acknowledged. And yet the fear of the shadow is immense. To allow these hidden parts into awareness feels dangerous, almost like betrayal of the very strategies that ensured survival. The persona whispers, if you show who you really are, you will not be loved. The shadow whispers back, if you continue to hide, you will never be free. Between these voices lies the battleground of the psyche. The consequence of ignoring this battle often appears in relationships. A person drawn again and again to emotionally unavailable partners is often chasing an old pattern. The persona seeks to prove worth by conquering indifference, while the shadow aches simply to be received. Each rejection reopens the childhood wound. Each temporary victory feeds the illusion that love must be earned. The cycle continues because the mask and the hidden self are still divided. We must remember the persona is not evil. It allowed survival. It allowed the child to find some stability in an unstable home. But when the persona becomes fused with identity, it imprisons the adult. Life becomes a series of roles: the competent worker, the agreeable friend, the pleasing partner, none of which feel entirely real. The shadow unlived festers in silence, shaping choices in ways unseen. This is why Jung spoke of individuation as the process of uniting opposites. To heal is not to discard the persona entirely, nor to unleash the shadow without restraint. It is to allow dialogue between them. The persona can remain as a useful social tool, but it must no longer suffocate the authentic self. The shadow must be faced, not feared for. It carries the vitality that makes life whole. Consider the image of a theater stage. The persona is the costume worn under the bright lights. The shadow is the actor behind the curtain, unseen but essential. If the costume is all that is shown, the play feels hollow. If the actor never steps forward, the story cannot be told. Individuation is the moment when the actor and costume are reconciled, when the performance no longer hides the person, but serves to express them. This reconciliation begins with noticing. Notice the apology forming on the tongue when no apology is needed. Notice the tightening of the body when kindness is offered without conditions. Notice the way silence feels unbearable unless filled with explanations. Each of these is a clue, a thread leading back to the fracture of childhood. And each is an invitation to step out of the mask, if only for a moment. At this stage, the work is not yet transformation. It is recognition. To see the persona at work is already a great step. To feel the shadow stirring beneath it is a sign of readiness. The battle between the two is not a flaw, but the natural rhythm of a psyche longing to be whole. Here lies the essence of part 3. The struggle between shadow and persona defines the adult shaped by narcissistic love. It is the conflict of authenticity versus survival, of tenderness versus fear of presence versus performance. The fracture of childhood lives on in this tension, and yet within it also lives the seed of awakening. For only by confronting this inner battle can one begin to choose a different way forward. And so the path continues. From fracture to mask, from mask to hidden truth, the journey is preparing for its next turn. For the moment of awakening comes when the battle is no longer denied, when the shadow is faced with compassion, and the persona learns it is no longer in command. Awakening rarely arrives as a sudden flash. More often, it begins as a quiet noticing, a pause between old reactions, a subtle recognition that what once felt natural is no longer necessary. The nervous system tuned for survival stumbles upon a moment of stillness, and something inside whispers, perhaps the danger has already passed. This is the turning point, the moment when awareness pierces the fog of repetition. The individual begins to see that the endless apologizing, the constant explaining, the mistrust of tenderness are not immutable traits. They are patterns, and like all patterns, they can be observed, questioned, and eventually released. What once felt like identity now appears as adaptation, and this realization opens the door to change. Jung described individuation as the process by which the unconscious becomes conscious. Until then, the patterns govern silently, directing choices that feel like fate. But when one sees the persona clearly and dares to acknowledge the shadow beneath it, a new possibility emerges. The mask is no longer mistaken for the face. The fracture is no longer mistaken for the whole self. Awakening often begins in the body before it reaches the mind. A woman notices how her shoulders tense when her partner shows genuine kindness. A man feels the impulse to explain his boundary, yet catches himself before he does. In these pauses lies the seed of freedom. For the first time, the pattern is not followed automatically. The choice to respond differently begins to appear. This recognition can feel unsettling. The familiar strategies of survival carried certainty, even if they carried pain. Without them, the psyche enters unfamiliar territory. To receive affection without suspicion feels almost dangerous. To assert a boundary without justification feels almost reckless. Yet this discomfort is a sign of growth. The nervous system is learning a new language, the language of trust, clarity, and authentic presence. The awakening also reveals the hidden strength of the shadow. What once seemed like a frightening reservoir of anger or need is now understood as vitality. The longing for unconditional love, the anger at being unseen, the hunger for rest without guilt. These are not flaws. They are the very energies that once integrated bring depth and wholeness. To meet the shadow with compassion rather than fear is to reclaim the lost parts of the self. This shift is not only psychological, but symbolic. Consider the image of a locked door. For years, the child carried the key, but was told never to use it. Behind the door lay all the forbidden feelings, grief-longing, rage, tenderness. Awakening is the moment the adult realizes the door can be opened. What lies inside is not a monster, but a neglected home. Dusty, perhaps, but still theirs to inhabit. With this awareness, the role of the persona also changes. It is no longer the jailer of the self, but a tool that can be set aside when intimacy calls for truth. The mask remains useful in the public sphere, in the workplace, in social rituals, but it no longer dominates the private heart. Awakening means learning when to wear it and when to lay it down. At this stage, many feel a deep grief. For in seeing the patterns clearly, one also sees the years lost to them. The relationships sabotaged by fear, the love distrusted, the boundaries abandoned. This grief is natural. It is the mourning of a life lived in rehearsal rather than presence. And yet, even this grief holds beauty, for it is proof that the soul has awakened enough to notice what was missing. Jung spoke of the self as the central archetype, the wholeness that embraces both shadow and light. Awakening is the first glimpse of this self. It is the sense that one's worth does not rest on performance, but on existence itself. It is the realization that love does not need to be earned, but can be received simply because one is. The symbols of this stage often appear in dreams, a recurring image of trying to cross a bridge and finally stepping onto it. A locked room in a house now entered. A mirror that once reflected only fragments, now showing a whole face. These symbols are not accidents. They are the language of the psyche, marking the shift from unconscious repetition to conscious becoming. The awakening is not triumphal. It is delicate. It requires patience and gentleness, for the old patterns do not vanish overnight. The body may still tense in the presence of kindness. The tongue may still prepare an unnecessary apology. The heart may still mistake calm love for boredom. But the difference now is awareness. The pattern is seen. The choice to respond differently is possible. This awareness begins to change relationships. When one recognizes the old urge to chase emotionally unavailable partners, they can pause, breathe, and ask, is this love, or is this my wound-seeking repetition? When one feels the impulse to perform for approval, they can instead risk showing a fragment of authenticity. And when one fears becoming like the narcissistic parent, they can recognize that the very fear is proof of empathy, not evidence of likeness. In this way, awakening does not erase the past, but reframes it. The scars are still there, but they are no longer mistaken for identity. The shadow is still present, but it is no longer feared. The persona is still used, but it is no longer the only face shown. What emerges is a sense of choice, the ability to respond rather than react, to create rather than repeat. Consider again the image of the cracked vessel. The fracture remains, yet light now shines through it. The vessel is not discarded, for it carries history and resilience, but it is also no longer defined by its damage. It becomes a symbol of beauty precisely because it has been broken and made whole again. Awakening is this recognition the wound can become the place where light enters. This part of the journey carries a quiet but profound message. You are not doomed to repeat the story of your childhood. You are not destined to chase love that hurts or mistrust love that heals. You have the power to notice, to pause, to choose differently. This is not a grand promise of instant transformation, but a steady invitation to live with awareness. Awakening is the hinge on which the rest of the journey turns. Without it, the patterns remain invisible, and life continues in repetition. With it, the possibility of individuation unfolds the journey toward wholeness, where shadow and light are embraced, where love is received without apology, where the self finally steps into its own presence. And so, from fracture to mask, from shadow to awakening, the path moves forward. The next step will not only be awareness, but action, the moment of choice, when boundaries are set, when tenderness is allowed, when the self begins to live as if it truly deserves to exist. Awareness alone is not enough. Awakening opens the door, but it is choice that allows one to step through. And choice in this stage often takes the form of boundaries, quiet but powerful acts of self-definition. To set a boundary is to declare, I exist. My needs are valid. My presence requires no apology. For someone shaped by conditional love, this is no small act. It feels like rebellion against the old law that survival demanded compliance. Yet it is precisely this rebellion that transforms survival into life. The first choices may be small. Saying no without explanation. Letting silence stand instead of filling it with endless justification. Allowing the body to remain still when affection is offered, even as the old alarm bells ring. These acts appear modest on the outside, but within they are monumental. Each one is a fracture in the old pattern, a crack through which freedom enters. Jung observed that individuation requires confrontation with the shadow, not to destroy it, but to integrate it. Boundaries are part of this integration. The anger once hidden, the longing once silenced, the need once shamed, all of these must now be honored. To say no is to listen to the shadow's cry for respect. To accept kindness is to embrace the shadow's hunger for care. What was once buried is brought into dialogue with the conscious self. This stage is often met with fear. The psyche whispers, "If I assert myself, I will be abandoned." The body recalls old punishments for daring to resist. But here lies the truth. Those threats belong to the past. The adult can now test reality, and in doing so, discovers that many relationships withstand honesty, and those that cannot were never safe to begin with. Choice reshapes not only the inner life, but the outer world. The individual begins to notice who respects their boundaries and who resists them. Relationships built on control grow strained, while relationships capable of depth grow stronger. Some ties may fall away, yet what remains is truer. Transformation always involves loss, but it is the loss of what no longer serves growth. In these moments, the persona loosens its grip. The mask is no longer the sole protector, for the self has learned to stand without it. A woman who once apologized for speaking now allows her voice to carry unshaken. A man who once sought unavailable partners now recognizes their distance and chooses differently. These are not grand gestures yet. Each choice is a revolution. The imagery of transformation is often elemental. Fire consumes the old scripts. Water washes away the residue of shame. Earth grounds the self in worth. Air fills the lungs with new breath. Boundaries are like the roots of a tree, anchoring the soul so that growth can reach upward. Without them, the tree bends with every storm. With them, it stands tall, even if the winds continue to blow. One of the deepest transformations at this stage is learning to endure love that does not require struggle. For many, this feels unnatural, even threatening. The nervous system associates calm affection with danger, interpreting safety as emptiness. But choice means staying in that unfamiliar space, resisting the urge to flee or sabotage. It means allowing love to be easy, even when every instinct demands difficulty. This endurance is not passive. It is an active decision to retrain the body and mind. When tenderness is offered, the choice is to breathe into it rather than recoil. When silence arises, the choice is to rest in it rather than fill it with apologies. When distance appears, the choice is to speak truth rather than collapse into old patterns of proving. Each act becomes a practice. Each practice a reshaping of the nervous system. Jung might say that this is the moment when the self begins to emerge the inner center that holds shadow and light mask and authenticity wound and healing. The self does not erase the past, but contains it. To live from this place is to know, I am not the sum of my scars, yet my scars have given me depth. Boundaries also bring a new kind of clarity. One begins to see how often love was mistaken for conquest, passion for chaos, approval for worth. The fog lifts, and the patterns that once seemed inevitable are revealed as choices waiting to be rewritten. This clarity does not come all at once, but in moments of recognition, like flashes of light in a dim forest. Consider the symbol of a mirror. For years, the mirror reflected only the mask, the persona carefully arranged for acceptance. Now, as choices are made differently, the mirror reveals more, a face less rehearsed, more alive, carrying lines of both pain and resilience. The mirror does not lie. It shows what has always been waiting beneath. Transformation is not without resistance. Old habits return sometimes fiercely. The tongue prepares to apologize before the mind catches it. The heart leaps toward distance before it remembers its worth. Yet each return is an opportunity, not a failure. The practice is not perfection, but persistence. Every conscious choice weakens the grip of the past and strengthens the foundation of the present. At this stage, compassion for oneself becomes essential. For the inner child who once had no choice, these new acts can feel overwhelming. But now, as an adult, one can offer that child what was once missing: patience, protection, and permission to exist without apology. The boundary is not only external but internal. The refusal to treat oneself with the same neglect once endured from others. And so transformation unfolds not in grand declarations, but in steady choices. Each boundary set, each apology withheld, each moment of tenderness received. These are the building blocks of a new life. They mark the passage from survival to living, from rehearsal to presence, from shadowed adaptation to authentic being. The story is not finished, but it has turned a corner. What was once fracture is becoming foundation. What was once mask is becoming expression. What was once shadow is becoming strength. Transformation is not a single moment, but a series of choices repeated until the unfamiliar becomes familiar and the old script no longer dictates the soul. This is the essence of Part 5, the movement from awakening to action, from awareness to embodiment. The self learns to defend its space, to receive without fear, to live without apology. And in these choices lies the quiet revolution of becoming whole. The journey now turns toward its final chapter, the integration, the closing arc, where the lessons gathered are woven into a life that feels both grounded and free. For healing does not end with boundaries. It ends with a deeper truth that one can live not merely as a survivor of the past, but as a human being fully alive in the present. Every journey has a moment when the path begins to feel familiar, not because it returns to the past, but because the soul finally recognizes itself. What began as fracture has moved through shadow mask and awakening. Now, it arrives at integration, the quiet recognition that you are not broken and that your worth has never depended on performance. The essence of this final step is not perfection, but presence. Healing does not erase scars, nor does it guarantee that old patterns will never whisper again. It means living with awareness, choosing each day to honor your boundaries, to accept tenderness, and to trust that your existence needs no justification. Here lies the deepest lesson. What once felt like survival strategies are no longer needed to define you. The nervous system that learned to scan for storms can now learn stillness. The tongue that formed apologies can now speak with clarity. The heart that sought love in places of absence can now recognize love in its true form, steady, patient, and unconditional. Jung once said, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." These words remind us that the story of your life is not fixed by the wounds of your childhood. You carry those experiences, yes, but you are not imprisoned by them. The fractures that shaped you are now the same openings through which light enters. It is important to remember that healing is not a final destination. There will be days when the mask feels safer than authenticity. There will be moments when the urge to explain or apologize rises again. But each time you notice the pattern and respond differently, you reaffirm your freedom. Each choice, however small, is an act of courage. And so the life lesson becomes simple, though not always easy. You deserve love because you exist, not because you prove, not because you please, not because you perform. Love is not earned in endless explanations, nor withheld until you become perfect. It is received by those who allow themselves to be seen as they are wounded, yes, but also whole. When you honor your boundaries, you give others permission to honor theirs. When you stop apologizing for your presence, you remind the world that every soul has the right to take up space. When you accept tenderness without suspicion, you teach your nervous system a new language, one that speaks of safety rather than fear. These choices ripple outward, transforming not only your own life, but the lives of those you touch. The closing image is this: a tree that once grew in rocky soil, its roots twisted by survival, now stands tall in open ground. The scars remain in the bark, but they no longer define its strength. The tree does not apologize for reaching toward the light. It simply grows because growth is its nature. So it is with you. As you walk forward, carry this truth gently. Individuation is not about becoming flawless, but about becoming whole. To integrate the shadow, to loosen the persona, to live in the tension between fear and authenticity. This is the work of a lifetime, and yet each step brings peace, for it leads you back to yourself. Take these reflections as a reminder that your story is not bound to repetition. You can set boundaries without guilt. You can receive love without fear. You can exist without apology. The love you long for is not found in proving your worth, but in embracing it. Before we end, I invite you to reflect. Which part of this journey spoke most deeply to you? Was it the moment of awakening, the act of boundary, or the realization that you have always been enough? Share your thoughts in the comments if you wish, and let us learn from one another's reflections. And as you rest tonight, remember this simple truth: the light you seek is already within you. It waits behind the fractures, beyond the mask, beneath the rehearsed apologies. It is yours, and it has been yours all along.